Hello everyone and welcome back to Days Out, and a first to me, my first foray into Scotland, and what better place to start by looking at the history of this country's railways here at the Bo'ness Kinneil Railway.
The railway runs for 5 miles and is worked by the Scottish Railway Preservation Society. Formed in 1961 at Falkirk, it relocated to the former Bo'ness Dock site in 1979. The branch to Bo'ness had closed in 1956 and the railway opened in 1981. Kinneil was reached in 1987, followed by Birkhill in 1989. Manuel was achieved in 2010, although the station didn't open until 2013. Today, the Society owns a vast collection covering all periods of Scottish railways and even operates rail tours throughout Scotland. Bo'ness Station came from Warmit on the Tayport branch near Dundee and was erected in the 1980s. The building has been given Category A status by Historic Scotland. The signal box is from Garn Queen South Junction near Coatbridge, whilst the footbridge is from Merthley north of Perth.
The centrepiece of Bo'ness, however, is this magnificent train shed which came from Haymarket. Haymarket was the terminus of the Edinburgh and Glasgow from 1842 to 1846. This train shed during its time has survived 2 expansions and was erected here by Sir Robert McAlpine and Sons.
Bo'ness houses the locomotive and carriage sheds as well as a workshop. Inside are Bagnall Austerity number 75254 from 1945, BR4MT 264 tank number 80105 and Turkish TCDD number 45170. On shed were 2 Ruston Hornsby diesels. On the left is a 165DS from 1951, which worked at Babcock and Wilcock in Renfrew, and on the left is an 88DS from the Canberra Bridge Distillery, built in 1952. Alongside the station is Bo'ness Harbour, which dates back to 1707. Extended in the 19th century, the harbour declined during the interwar years. It finally ceased trading in 1959. The service on this day was handled by Lord Roberts, outshopped by Nielsen Reed in 1899 for the Coltness Iron Company in Lanarkshire. Named after an army officer in the Indian Mutiny and the Boer War, Lord Roberts was withdrawn in 1969 and donated to the Society. The first station is Kinneil. A colliery was once sited here, and the station is now a request stop for a nearby nature reserve. Between Kinneil and Birkhill, the railway passes the Antonine Wall. This earth embankment, erected by the Romans between 142 and 154 AD, was designed to control the Caledonians north of Hadrian's Wall. Birkhill opened in 1989, using part of the station building from Monifeth near Dundee, after being displayed at the 1988 Glasgow Garden Festival. Until 2013, a fireclay mine was also situated a short distance away. Between Birkhill and Manuel, the railway crosses a viaduct over the River Avon. Manuel is the terminus, where there is a connection with the Edinburgh to Glasgow main line. Access to the main line is worked by a ground frame, which is released from Edinburgh, who also control the signals. Returning to Bo'ness, we'll take a look around the Museum of Scottish Railways, opened in 1995, and delve into the history of Scotland's railways. The oldest of Scotland's principal railways was the North British, formed in 1846, and provided the final piece of the East Coast Main Line from Berwick and the Royal Border Bridge to Edinburgh. Its next major routes were the Waverley from Edinburgh to Carlisle, completed in 1862, and taking over the Edinburgh and Glasgow. Formed in 1842, the latter's takeover provided the North British with its own workshop at Cowles. Other major engineering feats included Thomas Boucher's Tay Bridge of 1878 and its 1887 replacement, the West Highland Line in 1894 from Glasgow to Fort William, and its extension to Mallaig in 1901.
Representing the North British is this G-Class overflow saddle tank of 1882. Locomotives of this type were quite common in Scotland and were nicknamed pugs, and were often coupled to a four-wheeled wagon at the back which acted as an auxiliary tender. Under the LNER, the G was reclassified Y9, and this example was withdrawn in 1962 and spent some of its preservation career at the Lytham Motive Power Museum.
Rivalling the North British was the Caledonian of 1848, with its main line from Carlisle to Edinburgh via Carstairs. A second main line to Glasgow followed, the final piece of the West Coast Main Line. Some of the Caledonian's lines weren't actually owned by them, but they did have running rights. These included the Wemyss to Port Carlisle, the Lanarkshire and Ayrshire, and the Callander and Oban. Travelling to Balmoral, Queen Victoria often used the Caledonian, which helped to promote tourism in the Highlands. It also owned a fleet of steamers and was something of an innovator, being the first standard gauge railway in the UK to use bogie coaches and air braking. Representing the Caledonian is 439 number 55189, the Society's first acquisition. Designed by Mackintosh in 1897, the 439s were constructed by both the Caledonian and LMS. Used on suburban duties around Glasgow, they could also be found on branch lines and as bankers from Beatock. The smallest of Scotland's principal railways was the Great North of Scotland, with 335 miles of track. Formed in 1846, its territory was around Aberdeen and Inverness. Most of its network was single track, with freight traffic consisting of fish, agriculture, granite and whisky. These all came from a series of branches, such as those to Peterhead, Banff and Lossiemouth.
Representing the Great North of Scotland, we have Gordon Highlander. Now she's of a class of locomotive that actually came in two variants. The V's were the early examples, designed by Pickersgill with a saturated boiler, but Gordon Highlander is of the later F class, designed by Hayward with a superheated boiler. Later, she was classified D40 by the LNER.
The GNOSR also had royal connections, with the station at Ballater being the nearest to Balmoral. The station saw many royal visits and opened on the 17th of October 1866 on the extension from a boyne. Such was the appeal that the company ran an express named the Queen's Messenger. This Great North of Scotland coach dates from 1898 and started life as a director's saloon. Upgraded to a royal saloon in 1901, it was withdrawn in 1924. Alongside the Great North of Scotland was the Highland of 1865. The company came about after a merger between the Inverness and Aberdeen Junction and the Inverness and Perth Junction, spreading to Wick and Thurso in the north, Perth in the south, and Kyle of Lochalsh to the west. The Highland proved to be popular with tourists in the summer and game shooters in the autumn. Like the GNOSR, its network was largely single track and run by a small fleet of engines. However, in 1894, their CME, David Jones, from 1870 to 96, produced the Jones Goods, the UK's first 460.
On the Highlands Far North line was a small station at Dunrobin, the nearest to the Duke of Sutherland's estate. Now he was quite keen on the railways and even had his own private train, which used to run from Dunrobin to Inverness. In the formation was this splendid coach, inspired by the LNWR's Royal Train, and during its lifetime carried royalty and politicians. Withdrawn in 1949, it is on loan from the National Railway Museum. 1890 saw the completion of Scotland's finest railway achievement. It is, of course, the Forth Bridge.
Opened on the 4th of March 1890, the Forth Bridge was designed by Sir John Fowler, a well-established engineer, having previously worked for the London, Brighton and South Coast and the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire, as well as abroad. The bridge is 1 mile 1,066 yards long and constructed from 54,000 tonnes of steel. Costing £3 million, it's a cantilever design with 3 main spans supporting 2 central sections. Another pug is this example from Nielsen, built to a standard design in 1876. Working at the Gartsherry Iron Works, she was sold to Baird's Coal Mines in 1914 and donated to the SRPS in 1968. One of Scotland's most famous industrial firms is Andrew Barclay, founded in 1847. Based in Kilmarnock, their first locomotive appeared in 1859, with the company becoming specialists in 040 saddle tanks. Taking over John Cochrane and the North British Locomotive Company, Andrew Barclay was sold to Hunslet in 1972. Later taken over by Brush Traction, it is now owned by Wabtec Scotland.
This unusual locomotive is Lord Ashfield, built by Barclay in 1931. Barclay is credited with producing the first fireless locomotives in the UK back in 1912, the idea being that the locomotive would work off a pressure vessel rather than a boiler and firebox, which could produce sparks. In its service, Lord Ashfield was based at Brimsdown Power Station near Enfield before moving to Fleetwood, and came to the Society's collection in 2005 from the Manchester Museum of Science and Industry.
The North British Locomotive Company was founded in 1903 after a merger between Dubbs, Nielsen Reed and Sharp Stewart, and became well known for exporting locomotives across the world. Closer to home, it supplied various pre-grouping companies, including the Barry, Furness, Great Northern and the Northern Counties Committee in Ireland. The Big Four provided more orders, notably 5700 panniers for the Great Western, King Arthur's for the Southern, Junties, Jubilees and Royal Scots for the LMS, and A3s, B17s and B1s for the LNER. During World War II, ex-LMS 8Fs and War Department 280s and 210s appeared. Unfortunately, the company failed to adapt to the diesel revolution, going into liquidation in 1962. Several private companies were also involved in large construction projects, such as Morrison and Mason of Glasgow. They built a pipeline through the Ellen Valley for Birmingham Corporation between 1896 and 1902, using a narrow gauge railway system. Fairmaid of Foyers was the fifth locomotive supplied by Barclay in 1899. It then worked at various sites, ending her days at the British Aluminium Company at Foyers on Loch Ness in 1964 and donated to the Society. In 1914 came war, and a series of special coal trains from South Wales to Grangemouth, known as Jellicoe Specials, were run to serve the fleet at Scapa Flow. Sadly, on the 22nd of May 1915, a collision occurred at Quince Hill, involving a troop train with soldiers heading for Gallipoli. With a total of 226 deaths, Quince Hill is the UK's worst rail disaster.
During the First World War, many railways supplied locomotives to help the war effort, and the North British contribution were 25 of these. The J36-060, designed by Holmes in 1888. Maud is the only survivor, and named after Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Stanley Maud.
1923 saw the grouping of the railways into 4 major concerns, with the Caledonian and Highland going to the LMS, and the North British and Great North of Scotland to the LNER. On the LMS, Midland 4Fs, Black 5s and Ivet Moguls appeared, whilst the LNER introduced the P2s, J39s, B1s and 6 K4s for the West Highland Line. Both the LMS and LNER ran sleeper trains from London. This first-class sleeper emerged from Doncaster in 1935 and remained in service until 1972, being the last wooden-bodied sleeper in operation.
In the 1930s, steam was still the chosen form of power, but there were signs of the times ahead. In 1936, the War Office ordered its first diesel locomotive, similar to this one built by Barclay in 1941. During its time, this locomotive worked at the ammunition factory at Dalbeattie and remained in MOD service until 1973.
Battery and electric power were also being experimented with. This shunter was built by Dick Kerr in 1940 to an English electric design for the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Glasgow. It worked at the company's Govan goods yard, taking its power from the city's tram system. Coal mining was once a major employer, particularly in Ayrshire and Fife. The Fife area had 50 mines, both deep working and open cast, split between West, Central and Eastern divisions centred on Kirkcaldy. The pits closed in 1988 and the last mine at Longannet went in 2002. West Ayr area number 24 was supplied by Barclay to the Dalmellington colliery in 1953, remaining there until 1978. In 1948, the railways north of the border came under the control of BR's Scottish region, from Gretna on the west coast and Berwick on the east coast. Several new classes appeared, such as the Clans, 5 MTs, 4 MT tanks and 2 MT Moguls, as well as a fleet of diesels. The Class 20s were mainly used on freight turns, with some being fitted with tablet catchers. The class is represented by number 2 0020, which spent 6 months at Polmadie in 1967. As part of their pilot scheme, BR ordered 116 locomotives from the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, split into 2 classes, the 47 Class 26s and the 69 Class 27s. Placed in the Type 2 range, both had Sulzer engines, the 26s producing 1,160 horsepower, whilst the 27s were more powerful with 1,250. The only real difference between the two was that the 26s had root discs, with the 27s having headcode boxes. The first 20 ran on ex-Great Northern lines, but eventually all came to Scotland. Both classes underwent refurbishments during the 80s, with the 27s going first in 1987 and the 26s in 1993. The SRPS has an example of both types, with Class 26s numbers 26024 and 26038 and Class 27 number 27005. Multiple units also had their fair share of work, with the Class 126 being built at Swindon, especially for the Scottish region. Working from Glasgow to Edinburgh and Stranraer, the 126s later went to Edinburgh in 1971 and Ayrshire in 1982. Two industrial diesels from this period are North British four-wheeled diesel hydraulic Tiger from 1954, who worked at the Esso refinery at Fawley in Hampshire, and FGF, outshopped by Barclay in 1968 for British Gypsum's Cocklade Works in Cumbria. Sold to the Tanfield in 1982, she came to Bo'ness in 2012. 1963 saw the publication of the Beeching Report, which severely reduced Scotland's rail network, with several branch lines and secondary lines such as the Waverley route closing. The original plan would leave only the main lines, but the Highlands would see a revival of passenger numbers in later years. Glasgow, meanwhile, benefited from its own electrified suburban network, completed in 1967. This unit is one of 91 Class 303 units from Pressed Steel in Paisley, which worked on the north side. In 1968, British Railways became British Rail. They introduced the Class 37s to the Highlands, with some, like 37025, carrying insignia, in this case a stag for Inverness Depot. Another addition were the Class 47s on the main lines. Some replaced the 27s on the Edinburgh to Glasgow push-pull services, although number 47643 wears BR's intercity livery. Since pre-grouping days, post has been carried to Scotland in special trains, made famous by the LMS's film Night Mail in 1936. This vehicle emerged from Wolverton Works in 1977, having been rebuilt from a Mark I second corridor. Winters have always been harsh, with snowploughs being a common sight. Some early examples were rebuilt from old tenders, but this BR example was brand new and allocated to Perth. Since 1997, the majority of rail services have been operated by ScotRail under various franchises. Avanti operates on the west coast, whilst LNER is on the east coast. Recently, revival schemes have taken place to Alloa and the Waverley route as far as Tweedbank. This period is represented by the Society's newest edition, Class 91, number 91131. The last locomotive to be built at Crewe, she set a UK record for electric traction in 1991 at 154 miles per hour and has been donated by Eversholt Rail. Behind is a Mark IIIA sleeper from the Caledonian Sleeper. The modern equivalent of the LNER example seen earlier, the coach, built in 1983, features a pantry and has been donated by Porterbrook. The future of rail includes the Class 614 units. Rebuilt from Class 314s, they are powered by hydrogen fuel cells, with the first unit being shown off at the COP26 summit held in Glasgow in 2021.
So that was our visit to the Bo'ness and Kinneil Railway. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Now in this video, we looked at the history of Scotland's railways. But what about its cities? Well, tune in for the next episode when I'll be off to Glasgow to have a look at that city's transport history at their Riverside Museum. Take care everyone, and I'll see you all in the next one.